America, we gotta get back to doing what's expected of us as free citizens in this democracy. That means being tolerant, being respectful, staying informed, and being engaged. I'm former Congressman Joe Walsh. Follow me here and join the millions of Americans who are renewing their social contract with each other. The social contract, it's on us. I want to introduce you to my guest, Rachel. Tell me, Rachel, if I'm pronouncing Janfanza.
Perfect.
Boom. Rachel is the founder of The Up and Up. The Up and Up is a Substack newsletter all about young voters. So everybody listening to me right now and everybody who's subscribing to me, check out Rachel on Substack. Subscribe to Rachel Janfanza, and check out Up and Up. Rachel has its own Substack page newsletter.
Yeah, you can just go to the up and up.
Awesome.
If you can. Thanks so much for having me.
Say that again.
Thank you so much for having me. You can't hear me?
No, I've got, okay, hold on. Don't move, Rachel. Jump out of there and I'm getting an instruction from Melissa, my able right hand. Don't you move, Rachel. You look great. I think you sound great. I can, hey, Helene, check out I think, Rachel, you can hear me fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can hear you fine. Let's go. Let's start in no particular order. When you talk about young people, in your mind, Rachel, what age group are we primarily talking about?
Primarily 18 to 29-year-olds, but I mean, I typically do Gen Z, which would be anyone who is 27 and younger. So it kind of depends on if we're talking about young voters or young people, but basically in that age range.
And when we look, Rachel, at 18 to 29-year-olds, how old are you?
I'm 27.
You're such a kid. That's awesome. Rachel, 18 to 29-year-olds, tell me and everybody listening to us right now, in your mind as a 27-year-old, you're part of this generation. If you were to compliment your generation, what's the highest compliment you'd give your generation? And then give me your most cogent criticism of your generation. Let's start there.
This is a great question. And I've never been asked this before. Okay. My highest compliment to Gen Z would be how values driven we are. And there's such strong personality amongst members of my generation, really craving authenticity and originality and just trying to rewrite the script on a lot of outdated norms. So that would be my biggest compliment. And my biggest criticism, I would say, would be, I think if you look at the youth voter turnout rate, this is a generation that cares deeply about issues. And like I said, is very values driven and yet could still be voting at a higher rate. So I would say my biggest criticism would be, unfortunately, the level of participation isn't quite where it could be. That's been true of young people throughout history. And while Gen Z has demonstrated high youth voter turnout, there's always room for improvement.
And Rach, when you say values driven, just explain that to me.
Yeah. So sometimes, I mean, these values have shifted. I think we might get into this, but Gen Z was from the get-go perceived as very left-leaning, very progressive, and very vocal about those causes. And that narrative has shifted a little bit. And young people are definitely more on the whole conservative than they were 5 years ago. But that being said, many of the values are still the same. Like I said, they want authenticity. There's no room for BS. They want, You have to pass their sniff test. They can tell if someone's being real or fake. I think a lot of this is kind of ironically because of social media. Um, they feel very close in proximity to leaders and people in positions of power because of social media. And so they expect accountability and transparency. And there's also a lot of empathy across the political spectrum from members of the generation, understanding the way that their peers are living and wanting to have conversations across party lines. This generation is pretty split politically, but everyone I speak to really does want to have room for conversation across party lines.
It's so cool, the notion, Rachel, of authenticity. Like, maybe you know this, I became a Democrat 2 weeks ago. I was like Mr. Tea Party guy, and in 14 years, I've literally become a Democrat because I so oppose Trump and what my former party is. But Trump gives the appearance of being authentic. Like, he's not a politician. And I don't want to get into Trump, but I like, this is one of my biggest criticisms of too many Democratic politicians. They sound like politicians. They don't sound like authentic, like real people. Respond to that.
I mean, there was a moment this winter when Senate Democrats all posted the exact same thing on their Instagram. And it was kind of this like form template reel
Yeah.
that was very cringe. And that was just a perfect example of kind of trying to be something that they are not. And that was definitely in response to the conversation about media after the 2020 election. But there's not like a format for authenticity. The point is that it's different for each person.
Right.
And so I agree with you that on both sides, there are politicians who try to appeal to certain demographics by maybe playing off certain trends, whether it's like posting a Taylor Swift
Yeah.
graphic or meme or something, or even some of the conversation about going on the podcasts. But I think that because in the last election cycle, at least, um, young people felt like Trump always said what he wanted and got away with it, and people appreciated that about him, even if they disagreed with it. Whereas they somewhat resented the fact, even if they were Democrats, that it felt like Democrats were always kind of circumventing around issues and not just saying how they feel.
Do young people, Rachel, think that Trump lies? Or do they think like he just says what he thinks and he gives it to you straight? Whereas like
Yeah.
I would say, no, he's lying all the time. But does that
The thing is that young people don't trust any politician. They think all
ah
politicians are lying.
that Rachel, that is such a great point. I do a lot of speaking on college campuses, and I would go on college campuses and I'd say, Donald Trump is this unique threat to our democracy. Wake up, young folk. And Rachel, they'd look at me and say what you just said. Joe, all politicians suck. Biden's too old. Our politics sucks. Kind of, right?
Yeah, it's because they don't trust anyone, it kind of puts everyone on the same playing field, even if there are differences between candidates. And certainly there are candidates who are breaking through who maybe are younger, maybe they're even, if you look at someone like Senator Bernie Sanders, he's super popular with young people despite his age because it's about personality and policy rather than it is about the age of the candidate. So it's not even a age, it's more just about the way that you're communicating. But I think, back to sort of what I said at the beginning and to answer this question is they don't really trust anyone. Trust is declining, trust the federal government. Yeah. They trust people who they have a relationship with, whether
Yeah.
it's a parasocial relationship or a real relationship.
I think that's so cool. I think that's such a unique difference because if I tell the average 50, 60, or 70-year-old that Trump is a unique threat, generally, unless they're a big Trump voter, they'll understand that. But when I tell the average 20-year-old that Trump is a unique threat to our democracy, Rachel, generally their eyes will roll at me or they'll say, Joe, yeah, kind of, they all suck. I can't trust any of them.
Yeah, and Joe, it's interesting too because I talked to a lot of young Trump voters, and not all of them trust Trump either. Like they're
Yeah.
kind a lot of people see this as the lesser of two evils. That's something I hear all the time. And whether that's the right way to look at it or not, I don't know, but it's the way it's perceived. They don't it, it because the perception of both parties is so fraught, it kind of just levels out.
I think that's so important, Rachel. And I think it's so important for people my age to hear that, uh, that young people have this. I don't want to call it cynicism, or would you call
It
it
is.
cynicism?
It's 100% cynicism, skepticism, disillusionment, jadedness. It's all of the above. And if you think about this generation, who can really blame them? They were born either, and I'm part of this. I was born in 97. I was born just a few years before 9/11. And ever since, it's been one chaotic event after the other, from massive hurricanes like Hurricane Katrina to the financial crisis of 2008 and the aftermath to school shootings, mass shootings, more climate change events. And then it's been political chaos, partisanship, turmoil. And that's all before the pandemic. And then there was the pandemic, which not only completely fractured society, but also this generation into two distinct cohorts of people who had graduated high school before COVID. I call those people Gen Z 1.0, or graduated high school during COVID or after. I call that Gen Z 2.0. And the lived experience for this generation was just really different depending on sort of what stage of life they were at during the pandemic. So it's just been, and then since the pandemic, things haven't really gotten back to quote unquote normal. That's something I hear from young people all the time, where it's like this nostalgia for a past that they don't even necessarily really remember. So when you talk about the cynicism and the skepticism and the frustration, it's rooted in the events that have shaped their upbringing, their adolescence, their childhood.
Like the average Gen Z voter in this country, Rach, doesn't know a time when like Republicans and Democrats came together and got things done and reached across the aisle and like shit worked, politics worked, right?
They that's completely foreign to them, even to me. I mean, the Trump's been on the ballot for every election that Gen Z could vote in, and whether you love him or not, there's no denying that he has completely changed our political landscape.
What you just said right there, Rachel, always blows old farts like me away. Most of Gen Z has only known Donald Trump on the ballot. I mean, that's
And if
just go ahead.
no, I was just going to say the last thing. If they're a Republican, they have become a Republican in Trump's Republican Party.
That's a really important distinction. Hey, Rachel, what is your? Tell me, give us your quick background and how you came up with and founded the Up and Up.
I appreciate that. Thank you for asking. So, I was in college during the first 4 years of Trump's first term in office, or his first term, not his whole first term, and I became really fixated on the youth led resistance to his first term and just looking at sort of the response from a journalistic perspective. And I was covering this, and then I wrote my senior thesis in college on the role of social media and youth led social movements between 2010 and 2020, which is now totally outdated. But I then went to work at CNN. I was on their digital politics team writing about young voters in the lead up to the 2020 election. And after that, I started traveling across the country with CNN, going to Republican districts and talking to voters there. And I became really interested in the fact that I would go to these parking lots at like a Costco or a Walmart, and I would talk to all of these voters on the day before an election. And I would talk to all these young people who felt really strongly about so many different issues. And then I would go to the polls the next day, and they weren't necessarily there. And so I decided that I wanted to explore more sort of the gap between young people's political aptitude and passions and then their voting habits. So I started the Up and Up in 2022, which is my newsletter, with that in mind. And I started to hold listening sessions in communities, on campuses, at high schools, at people's homes. Um, And I travel to do these. I also now do them virtually as well. And I really discovered that I just loved having these conversations with young people, and that it was really productive to give people a space to have these conversations too, because a lot of schools shy away from talking about political topics. And so a lot of these discussions just weren't being had in the way that they could have been. And now what I do, kind of fast forward, is I have I've realized that in these conversations, so much of the topics that come up are related to politics, but are about economics and dating life and just culture. And so the Up and Up now is the go-to place to learn about young people's thoughts on all of this. I have a Gen Z community that I regularly tap into for reality checks and listening sessions. And I help organizations, brands, and individuals who want to better reach young people. I arm them with the insights to be able to do so.
Do Rachel, do young people, is Gen Z into politics? I know that's a stupidly general question, but as a generation, are they political?
I mean, okay, just framing my work in general, I always say like this generation is not a monolith. And even though I talk a lot about Gen Z is this and Gen Z is that, like we have to acknowledge that there are so many different opinions and perspectives and identities within this generation. So first, that is what I would say. But when it comes to are they political, I think that there's a difference between their sort of opinions and perspective on politics and then their civic action. They're political. They care about politics. They know that their life is fully, so many different facets of their lives are determined by politics. Even if you look at right now, there's so much global chaos and uncertainty and fear. And they know that that's rooted in political decisions or decisions that are made by politicians. And so yes, they deeply care. They aren't necessarily voting or protesting in or taking civic action or running for office themselves in the way that they perhaps could be. But they are, there are high numbers of young people running for office. There are young people who the protest thing has shifted over the years. And I think that there's just a lot of disillusionment with the efficacy of protesting because there are a lot of young people who did demonstrate in the sort of 2018 to 2022 era and just feel like it didn't lead to the results that they hoped it would. And then there's also a cohort of young people who are looking for more entrepreneurial solutions and see problems in their community, but don't think that politics is the way to solve it.
That's and Rachel, that's a really cool thing to say because I've heard that in having conversations with young people is they don't necessarily look to politics or the political system or per se even government to fix the problem, to address an issue. What you just said about entrepreneurial, looking at other areas to focus on a problem. You found that same thing.
Definitely, especially more so since I would say last summer in the lead up to the 2024 election. I think people were really frustrated by the fact that at the beginning, this was going to be a rematch between President Biden and President Trump. And that just really turned a lot of young people off because they were like, how can it be the same two candidates? How can this can't be representative? And so from the get-go, I think there was just a lot of skepticism, cynicism, frustration with that, that hasn't gone away. And I think now, especially, certainly there are young people who love Trump, but there's also a huge cohort who don't and who also don't like the Democrats and who think that either A, we need new leaders or A and B. A, we need new leaders and B, that there are other ways to get involved that might be external from politics.
The Rachel, take both of these questions because I think my audience needs to hear and understand both answers. The young people who are Trump voters and they really like Trump, tell us why. And the young people that you've spoken with and had conversations with that can't stand him, help us understand why. Both.
Yeah. So there's both, and there's also people in the middle too, who not that they're moderate, they might be moderate, but they just don't see themselves aligned with either party right now. That's a large cohort of people that I think is deeply underrated. So I'll start with the young Trump voters. There is a cohort, of course, all of the headlines after the election were talking about young men, and there was a massive shift to the right amongst young men, and there's a huge gap in support for Trump between young men and young women, with young men being way more supportive of him. And yes, I've spoken to plenty of young men who voted for Trump who either there's a mix of reasons. It's not one single, but the economy was top of mind. There were a lot of people who thought that he would bring more global stability, which it's interesting to follow up now on that and see how people are sort of shifting their thoughts as a result of this current global conflict. And then there's people who were really turned off by restrictions during the pandemic and who grew really frustrated with authority during lockdowns and school closures and mask mandates and vaccine mandates and the way that the social media platforms had removed certain voices that were seen as more controversial, including the president. And this cohort of people, and it's not just young men, but they that really just rubbed them the wrong way. And I think that I've written a lot about this, but during the time of the pandemic, if you think about being a young adolescent, let's say like a 14-year-old boy, and someone's telling you that not only can you not go to school, but you can't play your sports, you can't go to prom, you can't graduate, all of these things. And who were the people who were deemed as the ones who were in charge of these protocols? It was Democrats. And so if you want someone to blame, you're going to blame Democrats. And I think that was a large part of this. And then Trump was spewing rhetoric that, and there was also this like whole cohort of people online, this manosphere as it's been dubbed, but like this right wing ecosystem online that were the people who maybe were removed from certain platforms because of certain things that they had said. And, um, therefore, this group kind of aligned with that type of rhetoric. And I think that is part of the inroads that Trump made with young people as well. And then on top of that, there's also just been this frustration with political correctness writ large that has really plagued Democrats. And it's not just young men who feel this way, but I've spoken with plenty of young women who just feel like they were going to be chastised if they said what they wanted, if they said what they really meant, or they didn't use the correct language, and they felt like Democrats were really policing that language. And so that's a part of why people voted for Trump as well.
And you know what, Rachel, you know what's so cool about this conversation is there are generational differences, but there are similarities too. Like I was out there every day last year campaigning for Kamala Harris, and I would hear from older people a variation from every single one of them, older people, a variation of, Joe, I know Trump's an asshole, but the Democrats are snobs who look down on me and tell me how to live. And that is different, but somewhat similar to stuff you've heard from young people as well.
Definitely. The reality is that young voters aren't so different from older voters after all. Like all of these generation, yes, there are generational differences, like of course. But I think that a lot of these get misunderstood and kind of there are just sort of tropes and narratives that get overplayed about generational divides and all young men think this and all young women think that, and the only way to actually know what young people think is by listening to them. So that's what I try to do. um but they're not it's not so different. Like young people's top issue was the economy. And yet every time that Democrats messaged to young people, it was about climate change and gun safety and reproductive health care access. And they care about those issues. They totally do. But in the immediate, when you can't afford to pay your bills or put food on your table or like pay for college, you're thinking about the economy. And so and that's kind of, something that I try to say a lot as well.
Did you, Rachel, before I get to the people who don't, young people who don't like Trump, did you ever hear from young people who are Trump voters that he's just like a total fuck you to the system and the system needs a fuck you?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many people who are anti-establishment who are pro-Trump. And also the thing about young Trump voters, a lot of them are not Republicans. Like they would not consider themselves to be Republicans. they consider themselves part of the MAGA movement. And that's part of this, like, this anti-establishment, maybe more populist, like out with the old and with the new. Let's get rid of the system. The system is broken. It's not working for us. And Trump really tapped into that. But there's a lane for Democrats to tap into that too, especially because Trump's now been in office 2 times. So he is part of the system.
He
Um,
he he is now the system. Yeah, you're right. Rachel, then quickly, the young people who can't stand Trump, what do they tell you?
I mean, there are so many young people who feel that he has personally attacked their rights and their identity. And that's a big part of it. And they feel like he is taking away their autonomy, their ability to learn the way that they want to learn, to live the life that they want to live, whether it's, about LGBTQ rights or immigration. Um, it's more rooted in identity, I would say, which is interesting because it's hard because, if you're a Democrat, there's this conversation of kind of moving away from identity politics. And yet, so much of the reason that many young people are frustrated by Trump or it feels personal that he's personally attacking pieces of who they are.
It's that's really, really interesting, Rachel. By the way, everybody listening to Rachel right now, subscribe to her. Rachel Janfanza, subscribe to her on Substack. Also go to the Up and Up on Substack as well. Rachel, I was out at the No Kings protest all weekend, spoke at a bunch of rallies, loved it, loved the vibe, loved the energy. No Kings. Everybody there was middle age or older,
Yeah.
maybe a handful of young people. And I thought to myself, why? Why not? That's why I wanted to talk to you. Why not? Like, why was it just mostly, why were not young people out on No King's Day? And it was just old farts like me.
Well, okay. There's a few reasons. One, I think a lot of young people, and I kind of got into this a little bit before, but a lot of young people who were in the older cohort of Gen Z were part of prior social movements, whether it was Black Lives Matter or March for Our Lives or climate strikes or, around the overturning of Roe versus Wade or all of these things, and just feel like they went, they protested, and it didn't make a difference. And these issues still prevail. So there's a lot of questions about the efficacy of the protest and whether or not it feels performative sometimes, I think, for people. And then the other part is there's just exhaustion. Like I don't want to do this. It doesn't make a difference. And so why would I do it? And then there's also a lot of young people who like don't I mean, to be like I said before with the people who voted for Trump, like there were a lot of young people who voted for Trump who feel like there's no problem in the world right now. Who like the way that he is about certain, I think more on the cultural stuff they like Trump's approach. I think when it comes to the actual policy, there's a lot of question marks around his policies, especially his economic policies, but it's not enough to get them out to a protest. And also, these are not necessarily super political people. They might not have known there was a protest.
And that all makes sense. And I would have said a lot of that as well. The was part of it too, Rachel, like the whole no kings, Trump's the king. Is that another one of those where young people would kind of say, come on, Joe.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Yeah. I think the framing of it might be a little bit mismatched to kind of the Gen Z vibe. I did a reality check earlier this week, and I had someone tell me that the monarchy or like the fascism rhetoric, it feels a little bit stale, but also kind of like Boy Who Cried Wolf in a way. Because this was said before the election and then Trump was elected. So I don't know if that framing is resonating. That framing is not resonating with young people. I'll just say it that way.
Hey, Rachel, just as someone who's used that rhetoric all the time, you feel free, just say it. It does not connect with young people. I acknowledge that. Now, You and I might disagree. This is the old guy in me. I want it to connect. Like, I wish I could speak to young people every day and tell them, try to explain to them the threat he is to democracy, blah, blah, blah. But you make the cogent point. It doesn't connect with.
I'll tell you what does connect. What does connect with young people is the issues that are affecting their lives and talking about economic policy, talking about housing, talking about even cultural stuff. Like there are people who are really fired up about the culture wars and all of that resonates, but they don't want it doesn't, some sort of like catch-all term that feels just like a little removed and not grounded in reality is not going to break through.
Um, Look ahead, Rachel. 26 and 28. Um, where's Gen Z going to go? What are they going to look at? What are they going to focus on politically? Do you see them more engaged in the 26 elections, the 28 presidential? Map out what you think the next 4 years might look like.
I think that if the economy continues to be as volatile as it is, if inflation continues to rise, if housing prices and rental prices continue to rise, if college is still super unaffordable, if we're in a war, I mean, all of these things matter to the daily lives of young people and they will vote, they will take action. If I think the more real that these threats feel, the more engaged they will become. And I would say that those are the priority issues that they're paying attention to. And I'm hearing from a lot something that's interesting too, and I don't need to sound sappy about this because I think it could come off that way, but there are a lot of in this reality check I did this week, a lot of people were telling me that they're scared by how far apart the parties seem and how divisive all of these issues are, and that is bothersome to young people, especially young people who feel frustrated by both parties and don't know they feel politically homeless.
That's interesting. Even Rachel, the notion of like this two-party duopoly. Tired of that, huh?
Yeah, very tired of that, want other types of options. And so President Trump was having his public fight with Elon Musk, and Elon Musk put that post on X about, should he start a new party? I was really intrigued to see the number of people who were resonating with that. And while this might not be feasible, and I don't know that this is something that is going to happen, I do think there's a lot of appetite for sort of like I was saying about entrepreneurship and new ideas. There's so much frustration that everything feels broken, but there's a lot of resolve to want to create and ideate solutions.
Did that makes me wonder, Rach, Elon Musk, generally what did, and again, I know we're generalizing about everything. Your generation, what good, the bad, and the ugly, what they think about Elon?
It's split. People think that he's a genius who is so entrepreneurial and going to change the course of humankind. And then there's people who don't think he should be involved in politics at all and are completely fed up and frustrated and were scared by Doge. And there's people in the middle. And it was interesting. Like, I was really focused on how young men were reacting to their public feud because there were so many young men who I had talked to who were Trump supporters who liked that Elon Musk was this aspirational figure. And before the election, like that was a big, piece of something that had excited them about sort of this like cast of characters of Avengers, of people who were supporting the president. And once this debacle happened, I checked in with them, and those people were split too, in terms of like, some were very loyal to Trump and were like, Elon shouldn't be involved in this. And then others were more loyal to Elon and saying that when you look at, over the next 30 years, who is going to have more longevity and power? And a lot of people thought that that would be Elon Musk.
Yeah, makes sense. Rachel, politicians in both parties candidates in both parties, and I know in essence, you've answered this, but if they come to you for advice, how do I best reach young people with what? With what messages? How do I approach young people? How do I connect with them? What do you say?
The number one thing is be yourself. And don't try to pretend to be something that you're not. Even if it means you're gonna be old or you're gonna, don't be afraid of that. Like, it's not that young people don't like old people. There's so many older politicians or, pop culture figures who have massive audiences of young people. It's more just about presenting as who you are without any sort of veil over it. And then the other thing, there's been a lot of talk about like what podcasts should people go on in order to reach young people. And the reality is that it's such a fragmented media ecosystem, and every young person has a different media diet and is consuming their news and entertainment in a different way. I think that given that people who are pretty political already kind of know where their preference lies, in order to reach the people who aren't as politically tapped in, it really is about going to the cultural spaces and politically coding culture rather than culturally coding politics. And that's something that I think Trump did really well in 2024. But it's a challenge because there are so many different opportunities to reach young people and platforms and avenues to do so. But at the end of the day, it's about being yourself. So if you're someone, and this goes for like brands, but also politicians, of course, if you're someone who is, or like business leaders, whoever it is, if you're someone who, loves to cook and that's one of your hobbies, you should go on the cooking shows. If you're someone who's really into beauty and you like trying different products, you could do a get ready with me video and team up with influencers in the beauty space. If you're a fisherman, you should go on the fishing podcast. Like, our media has become so niche. There are so many different channels for different types of hobbies and personality traits and things that there's an avenue for everyone. And I think it's just about connecting with the lane that's best for you and really where you can find your niche.
Cool. My last question to you is this. I asked you to critique your generation. Now I want you to critique mine. Um, your own critique combined with the young people you talk to.
Okay.
Boomers, us folks in our 50s and 60s. Young people, what would be yours and their highest praise of our generation and their most severe criticism of us?
Yeah, I'm also curious how I ask you the question, what you would say, but I'll answer this first. Um, okay. I'll start with the criticism, then I'll end on a positive note. The criticism I would say would be don't have misconceptions and actually listen. I think that there's a lot of eye rolls about, oh, Gen Z's lazy. Oh, they're not good employees. They don't understand the way the world works. They are not, they don't care. They don't vote, blah, blah. And like all of that could be, those are misconceptions that could be corrected if people actually just listened and took time to get to know the young people in their lives, if they're not in close proximity to them already, and having empathy and understanding sort of the consequences of which our generation has grown up. Not only have we gone through all those crises that I laid out, but also we've lived our lives on a phone in this very virtual world where there's a lot of loneliness, and it's, just the social norms have been broken down. And then my biggest compliment to your generation would be just the amount of wisdom and experience and, I think, grit that people have. And I think that's something that our generation could learn a lot from. But I want to know your take too. What do you think's wrong with Gen Z?
Oh, Rachel, this is a lot of fun, actually. My biggest criticism of your generation, and I say this to young people directly, is um, sometimes you just have to do shit. Sometimes you just have to vote. Sometimes you just have to go to school. Sometimes you just have to fucking work. Sometimes you have to vote for somebody you don't even like. Like that's how we grew up. And that's how my old generation grew up. And I think my biggest criticism of your generation is, and it's combined with my biggest praise, like things have to be perfect or so idealistic, or you need like Rachel, when I was young, I had to go to church, even though church was fucking boring. But I had to go, and I had to go. And that's how I raised my kids. I feel like your generation would say, no, Joe, there's not a good reason to go to church. It's boring. I'm not stimulated. I don't get anything out of it. And my generation would turn around and say, I don't give a damn. It's good for you. Just go. So that would be my biggest criticism. But my biggest praise, Rach, is the fact that you do naturally question shit way more than my generation did. I love that.
Yeah.
And the fact that your generation is so fucking tolerant, so open generally to differences in people, who you sleep with, how you identify, what God you believe or don't believe in, so much more tolerant than us older folk.
Yeah. I think that's true. And it is across party lines as well. Like, I know I think that there's misconceptions that certain people don't feel that way, but no, this generation is very tolerant across party lines.
I want to say to everybody listening, Rachel, this has been really interesting. And we're getting some great comments. Everybody, again, it's not just Rachel, but Rachel's generation is going to have to heal this country. Learn about them, understand how they're thinking, what they're thinking. That means subscribe to Rachel Janfanza, Janfaza on Substack, and check out the Up and Up on Substack as well. Gain understanding. Rachel, you're awesome. This has been fun.
Thank you so much for having me. And
We'll
again,
do it. We'll do it again. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, everybody.
everybody.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow The Social Contract with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been The Social Contract with Joe Walsh.